Hello. One could argue that my medical history puts the reliability of my narration into question. Good evening. I recently rewatched the movie Secret Window starring Johnny Depp, and I think it's probably the best metaphor I've ever seen for deconstructing your own narcissism. And as a primer, okay, before you start arguing with me in the comments about what narcissism is, I prefer to see narcissism as a personality trait that can get out of whack in certain people, as opposed to a label that you just slap on someone that you don't like. Are there certain people who are higher in that trait to the point where it envelops their entire personality and it's pretty clear to the rest of us that they're not going to change? Yes, there are people like that, but call me a naive idealist. I believe people can change. I'm looking forward to Donald Trump's self-aware era. I just think when you slap a label on people, they get defensive. And when they get defensive, they stop listening to new ideas that might challenge their worldview and help them evolve as people. Okay? Okay. Yar! So the main character, we'll call him Johnny Depp, is this famous writer who spends all day in a cabin in the woods, which is literally something I fantasize about every single day. But I think the movie is a lot closer to what that fantasy would actually look like. You know, Doritos wrappers and Mountain Dew bottles everywhere, just unshowered, living in complete disarray. The movie starts with one of the most iconic quotes in all of cinema.
You stole my story.
This man, who goes by the name of John Shooter, is pretty pissed off at Johnny Depp for allegedly, we want to be careful, stealing his story. Not believing him at first, Depp dismisses the man who promises he'll see him again real soon. He leaves the manuscript on Johnny Depp's doorstep, and then Johnny reads it, and he's like, well, holy shit, did I steal this? Shooter continues to harass Depp throughout the movie, getting more and more violent with each encounter until he finally murders his dog. I want to state publicly that this channel is anti-dog murder. Sorry, Michael Vick. Although you were the most fun player to play with in Madden 2004. He had 99 speed, 99 acceleration, 0 empathy. So Johnny Depp, pretty understandably shaken by these events, he decides to go to his local police station and report the incident. And nobody really takes him all that seriously. Everyone's just like, yeah, cool, man. We'll definitely look into that. They don't take him seriously, which, as I stated in the previous video, is like a pretty common reaction that mentally ill people get when they finally get up the courage to tell people what's going on with them. Everyone's just kind of like, yeah, that's okay. Most people give him the sort of obligatory advice that you give sad people.
Get a good night's sleep. You don't look too hot.
It should be noted that Johnny is pretty affected by his divorce. No, not that one. This is best exemplified in the scene where he sees his ex-wife drive away with her new man.
This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife.
And then the car drives away and it passes through the side mirror. And then on the bottom it says objects in the mirror may be closer than they appear, which is like a very, very not so subtle hint at the fact that his divorce is really bothering him. At one point, he burns down her house. Yeah, spoiler alert. And then he conveniently forgets it. He actually blames it on the new guy that she's with. Oh my God, the narcissistic brain works in such mysterious ways. Blah, blah, blah. End of the movie, Johnny Depp fights Shooter. Well, he becomes Shooter. He's been Shooter this entire time. Basically, he created this character in his head so he could carry out a lot of the dark fantasies that he was having towards his cheating ex-wife and her new man. The whole thing can be seen as like a really strong metaphor for malignant narcissism. It's a warning of what can happen when our ego gets damaged and we start acting out of a really dysfunctional place. If you've ever done anything out of revenge in your life and then afterwards you're like, holy shit, why did I do that? I'm such a psycho. That's you acting out of your shadow, out of dysfunction, out of your ego. Chances are you've created a victim narrative in your head that completely justifies all your shitty behavior. Like Johnny, you've allowed your inner John Shooter to corrupt you to a pretty antisocial degree. Turns out Johnny was the one who set the fire. He was the one who murdered John Greenleaf and his lawyer. He's the one who chops his wife's head off with a shovel at the end. Spoiler alert. Johnny has a bit of a moment at the end of the movie, sort of at the climax, where he realizes he's been John Shooter this entire time, and like all these other little Johnny Depps start popping up out of nowhere and saying things that are poking holes in his sort of unreliable narration. And as this is happening, the walls of the house around him begin to crack. To put on my English creative writing hat that has dog hair on it for a moment, I think the house is a symbol for his brain, and once he realizes that he can't trust his own brain, that's when his sense of safety and really his sense of connectedness to himself starts to completely fall apart. It's the moment at the end of Fight Club where the narrator realizes, like, oh, I've been a complete dickhead this entire time. Whoops. It is scary to realize your own narcissism. In that moment, you have this real clarity and you can finally see yourself for the first time. But at the same time, there comes rushing in this sort of deluge of shame and self-hatred and embarrassment and really fear to not be in control of your own emotions. You've been exposed to your shadow, the part of you that you'd rather just kind of sweep under the rug. You know, you finally looked at the man in the mirror. And yeah, maybe your environment caused a lot of these maladaptive coping mechanisms and weird phobias and traumas. But at the end of the day, the townspeople are still going to look at you and go, that guy needs to go to bed.
You gotta go home and lie down, Miss Rainey. You really don't look well at all.
One of the most chilling quotes by John Shooter in this movie is,
But what you don't understand is if we do start the fight, it's not going to end until one or the other of us is dead.
which I think when you start to suffer from delusions powerful enough, either reality or fantasy has to die. Like there's no in between. For me, that fantasy was like, I'm going to do something great, meaningful with my life. I'm going to create something that has a real impact on people. And the older I get, the closer I get to realizing that I've created sort of an elevated way of seeing myself to help me deal with the harsh reality that I'm just another unskilled laborer in a country that profits off the misery of unskilled laborers. There's a real obsession by both characters about how the story ends. I think that's a pretty common toxic thread in the thinking of most narcissists, is that they're really obsessed with how their story ends. I know I can do it, Todd Downey said, helping himself to another ear of corn from the steaming bowl. I'm sure that in time, her death will be a mystery even to me. That's how the story ends, Pilgrim. That's the final destination of letting your John Shooter take over. In time, you won't even remember the shitty things that you've done. You'll actually believe your own bullshit. You'll believe the lies that you tell everybody else. It'll just become your reality. You'll become a just pure, rock solid, bulletproof narcissist. So there's another moment with Shooter where Johnny Depp pretty much asks him, like, well, what if you're wrong? What if you're the one who stole my story and you just don't realize it?
Then I turn myself in, because if things turn out that way, then I suppose I am crazy. And that kind of crazy man has no reason or excuse to live.
Which is honestly how you feel after you realize how much of an asshole you've been and just the absolute trail of chaos in your wake. You go, hey, you know, maybe I should just fucking die. Obviously, thinking that you have no right to live just because you've made some mistakes or you have narcissistic personality traits is not the vibe. That's not what we're going for. But I think a lot of people think the way that John Shooter does, where it's like, I would rather just be gone than have to deal with like the consequences of my shitty actions. So one of the last things Shooter says, and this is after Mort has become Shooter, And his wife is there, and she's about to get her head chopped off with a shovel. And she says, like, where did you get that hat? And he goes,
It's mine. Wasn't ever anybody else's.
which is him just kind of weirdly, like, owning up to all the shit that he's done for the first time. I thought it was just a really interesting moment in the movie.
Ain't no more's here. More's dead. He did a whole lot of squirming around, but in the end, he couldn't lie to himself anymore, let alone to me. Now, I never put a hand on him, missus. I swear. He took the coward's way out.
I think if we take the most healthy interpretation of this, we hear, don't give in to your own narcissism. The moral of the story is, don't be like Johnny Depp. Don't blow up my comments, please. I don't have time for this. If you do, I'll kill you. Remember when Shooter earlier in the movie says, if we have this fight, one of us is going to have to die? Well, this is the moment in the movie where Mort dies. He stops putting up a fight, and he just completely gives into his ego. And that's when the shovels get involved. Maybe there's no such thing as a truly self-aware narcissist, but I think we can all be a little bit more aware of our narcissistic tendencies, and when we start acting out of the shadow, and we can try to avoid going down a similar road as Mort Rainey here. We just need to take a breath before we start chopping people's heads off with shovels. So yeah, this movie rules. 10 out of 10. Fantano review. Transition. Did you give this movie a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Don't become a writer, kids. It's a very stupid profession. It's not fun to go crazy. I know that you're sitting there in your intro to writing class at your liberal arts college and you think it would be cool to be really sensitive and brooding like David Foster Wallace, but let me just save you from a lifetime of misery and pain. You know what you should do? You should learn how to computer. Go learn computer. Go to the Genius Bar and ask one of those guys what they did to learn about computer. Go learn how to make an AI sex robot, okay? Because that's where the future is going. It's not going towards your fucking story about how you want to chop your ex-wife's head off. Also, I love that they put this scene in here for absolutely no reason.
Mort.
Also,
Do you think things would have been different if we hadn't lost the baby?
oh man. Also,
I'll give you a call later.
Okay, sure.
I'm gonna call you on the phone, okay?
it's just so iconic. Also,
Wait a minute now, back up just a sec. What about that?
this is such an unserious movie.
There is no John Shooter. There never has been. You invented him.
Overall, I think that Secret Window can be a really useful tool in understanding your own narcissistic tendencies. I think a lot of times when bad shit happens to us, like getting cheated on by your significant other, it's easy to live in a constant state of dysregulation and fantasize about the revenge that we want to get. But I think the point that this movie is trying to make is that there's a pretty thin line between fantasy and reality, especially when you're living a very unhealthy and disconnected life. That's it for today's video, and in the words of Mort Rainey, originally the words of John Shooter,
I know I can do it, Todd Downey said, helping himself to another ear of corn from the steaming bowl. I'm sure that in time, every bit of her will be gone, and her death will be a mystery, even to me.